I am Kathleen Wilson, though everyone calls me Katie. At 27 years old, I never expected to be at the center of my family's biggest scandal. Coming from old money thanks to my grandfather's business empire, I always felt like the black sheep. My sister Heather was the golden child, while I was just the disappointment. When Grandpa Lawrence passed away, I expected the will reading to be uncomfortable, but I never imagined what would happen next. If you are watching this, let me know where you are from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how my life changed forever that day. Growing up in Beacon Hill, one of Boston's most affluent neighborhoods, should have been a dream. Our family home was a stunning 5-bedroom colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn and a view of the Charles River. From the outside, the Wilsons appeared to have it all. My father, Howard Wilson, was a prominent investment banker who managed portfolios for some of the wealthiest families in New England. My mother, Diane Wilson, was a corporate attorney who specialized in mergers and acquisitions. They were the perfect power couple, always dressed impeccably, always saying the right things at the right social events. But the true source of our family wealth came from my grandfather, Lawrence Wilson. Grandpa Lawrence was a self-made businessman who built Wilson Enterprises from nothing in the 1960s. Starting with a single hardware store, he expanded into construction, then real estate, and finally diversified into various industries including technology and healthcare. By the time I was born, Wilson Enterprises was a household name in Boston and employed over 2,000 people. From an early age, I knew I was different from the rest of my family. While they discussed stock portfolios and business acquisitions over dinner, I would be sketching designs on my napkins or daydreaming about art exhibitions. My sister Heather, 4 years my senior, was the perfect Wilson heir. She had our father's head for numbers and our mother's sharp analytical mind. By the time she was 12, she could explain market trends and investment strategies. I, on the other hand, could tell you everything about Renaissance art techniques or the emotional impact of color theory topics that made my parents exchange worried glances. Heather followed the perfect trajectory my parents laid out for her. She attended Phillips Academy for high school, then went to Harvard for her undergraduate business degree, followed by Wharton for her MBA. She joined Wilson Enterprises at 24 and quickly rose through the ranks, becoming the Director of Strategic Development by 30. She married Bradley Thompson, the son of one of our father's business partners, in a lavish wedding featured in Boston Magazine. Everything about her life was calculated and executed with precision. Meanwhile, I struggled to find my place in a family that valued financial success above all else. I did well in school, but my interests never aligned with my parents' expectations. When I announced I wanted to study art history in college, my father actually laughed, thinking I was joking. When he realized I was serious, the disappointment on his face was crushing. "Art will not pay the bills, Kathleen," he said. "You need to be practical. The world does not reward dreamers." Despite their disapproval, I enrolled at NYU to study art history, partially funded by a scholarship I had worked hard to obtain. My parents refused to pay my full tuition as a way to teach me responsibility, even though they fully funded Heather's much more expensive Wharton education. Grandpa Lawrence was the only one who supported my decision. Without telling my parents, he helped me with rent for a tiny apartment in New York and occasionally sent me money for art supplies. "Follow your passion, Katie," he would tell me during our weekly phone calls. "Money is meaningless if you wake up dreading each day." After graduation, while Heather was climbing the corporate ladder at Wilson Enterprises, I was working as a gallery assistant at a small art gallery in Manhattan, making barely enough to cover my rent and student loans. My parents saw my career choice as further proof of my inability to make sensible decisions. Every family gathering became an opportunity for them to point out the contrast between Heather's success and my struggle. "Heather just closed the Anderson deal," my mother would announce proudly at Thanksgiving dinner. $10 million in revenue for the company. Then she would turn to me with a tight smile. "And how is your little gallery job going, Kathleen?" They never understood that for me, success wasn't measured in dollars. I loved being surrounded by art, discovering new artists, helping to curate exhibitions that moved people emotionally. But in the Wilson family, if you were not making substantial money, you were failing. The strain in our relationship grew worse when I decided to leave the gallery and try to make it as an artist myself. I had been creating mixed media pieces in my spare time, and a few local cafes had displayed my work. When a small piece sold for $300, I felt more pride than I ever had in my life. It was the first thing I had earned completely through my own creativity. My father was less impressed. $300, Heather makes that in an hour. When are you going to grow up and join the real world? What hurt the most was that they never even came to see my work. Not once. Heather visited once when she was in New York for a business conference. She looked at my paintings with a puzzled expression, clearly not understanding what she was seeing but trying to be supportive in her own way. They are very colorful, she offered, before quickly changing the subject to her recent promotion. Grandpa Lawrence was different. Despite being in his 80s, he made the trip from Boston to New York twice to see my exhibitions at local galleries. He would stand in front of each piece, taking his time, really seeing what I was trying to express. He bought my favorite piece, a mixed-media collage representing the complexity of family relationships, and hung it in his study where my parents would have to see it. "You have a gift, Katie," he told me. "Do not let anyone convince you otherwise, especially not your parents." As I entered my late 20s, my financial situation became increasingly difficult. The art world is notoriously hard to break into, and I found myself taking on side jobs to make ends meet. I worked as a barista, a dog walker, and a freelance graphic designer, all while trying to create and promote my own art. Meanwhile, my parents continued their tough love approach, refusing to help me financially, even when I was struggling to pay medical bills after a case of pneumonia landed me in the hospital for 3 days. "You made your choices," my mother said. "Now you have to live with the consequences." All the while, they continued to fund Heather's lavish lifestyle, buying her and Bradley a summer home in the Hamptons as a 5th anniversary present, and making sure she had every advantage possible in her career at Wilson Enterprises. The disparity in how they treated us could not have been more obvious, but whenever I brought it up, they dismissed my concerns. "When you start making responsible choices, we will treat you like a responsible adult," was my father's standard response. By the time I turned 27, I had almost given up on ever gaining my parents' approval or understanding. I focused instead on my relationship with Grandpa Lawrence, who remained my biggest champion, and the only family member who seemed to value me for who I was rather than what I could contribute to the family legacy. Grandpa Lawrence's health began declining about a year before his death. At 87, he had always been remarkably spry and sharp-minded, but a series of small strokes started to take their toll. As his condition worsened, I found myself traveling back to Boston more frequently. Despite my tight budget, I could not bear the thought of not spending time with him while I still could. His mansion in Brookline was a place that had always felt more like home to me than my parents' house. It was filled with books, art, and mementos from his travels around the world. Unlike the cold showroom quality of my parents' home, Grandpa's place felt lived in and warm. During my visits, we would sit in his sunroom, overlooking the garden, drinking tea, and having the kinds of conversations that nourished my soul. "Tell me about your latest project," he would say, his eyes still bright with interest despite his failing body. I would show him sketches and photos of my work, and he would ask thoughtful questions about my inspiration and technique. Sometimes he would share stories about his own life, about building his business from scratch, about meeting my grandmother Evelyn, who had passed away before I was born. "She was an artist too, you know," he told me during one visit. "Not professionally, but she painted watercolors that could break your heart with their beauty. Your father never understood that part of her. Too practical even as a boy." As his health deteriorated, our conversations sometimes took mysterious turns. About 6 months before he died, during one of our afternoon talks, he took my hand in his frail one and said something that puzzled me. "I have been watching, Katie. All these years I have been watching and taking notes. Do not worry. I am going to make things right." When I asked him what he meant, he just smiled and changed the subject. Similar cryptic comments came up several times in his final months, but he never elaborated no matter how I pressed him. The call came on a Tuesday morning in April. I was in my tiny Brooklyn apartment preparing for a job interview at a new gallery that was opening in Chelsea. My father's voice was uncharacteristically subdued. "Grandfather passed in his sleep last night. The nurse found him this morning." Despite expecting this news for months, it hit me like a physical blow. I sat down hard on my secondhand sofa, tears already streaming down my face. "The funeral will be on Friday," he continued, "all business as usual. I expect you to be here Thursday night for the family dinner beforehand." I managed to choke out that I would be there before hanging up. I spent the next hour crying, not just for the loss of my grandfather, but for the loss of the only person who truly saw and accepted me for who I was. The next few days passed in a blur. I maxed out my credit card to buy a last-minute plane ticket to Boston and a suitable black dress for the funeral. When I arrived at my parents' house on Thursday evening, the contrast between my life and theirs had never felt more stark. I wheeled my battered suitcase up the pristine driveway, acutely aware of my scuffed boots and the small tear in my coat that I had not had time to mend. Heather and Bradley were already there, both looking immaculate in expensive mourning clothes. My sister gave me a quick, perfunctory hug, while my mother frowned at my appearance. "You could have made more of an effort, Kathleen," she said by way of greeting. "This is an important family occasion." Dinner that night was tense. My father and Bradley discussed business while my mother and Heather talked about the funeral arrangements they had made with minimal input from me despite my close relationship with Grandpa. Several times I noticed them exchanging meaningful glances when certain topics came up, particularly anything related to Grandpa's estate. After the meal, I overheard a snippet of conversation between my parents in the kitchen as I was bringing in some dishes. "Franklin Pierce called again about the will situation," my father said in a low voice. "He insists on following Lawrence's exact instructions." "Well, we knew this was coming," my mother replied. "Howard, you need to make sure things go according to plan. We cannot have any surprises." They noticed me then and abruptly changed the subject. That night, as I tried to sleep in my old bedroom that had long since been converted into a generic guest room, I wondered what they had been discussing. I knew Grandpa was wealthy, but I had never given much thought to his will or inheritance. I assumed Heather would get the lion's share given her involvement in the family business, and I was fine with that. I expected perhaps a small bequest, maybe some of his books or art pieces that he knew I loved. The morning of the funeral dawned cold and rainy-fitting weather for the heaviness in my heart. The service was well attended, a testament to how respected Grandpa Lawrence had been in the community. Business associates, friends, and extended family filled the church. I sat between my parents in the front row, fighting back tears as people spoke about Grandpa's business acumen and charitable works. Not one person mentioned his love of literature, his dry sense of humor, or his secret passion for jazz music, all things that had made him so special to me. After the burial, the family solicitor, Franklin Pierce, approached us. He was a thin, serious man who had worked with my grandfather for decades. "The will reading will take place tomorrow at 10 o'clock at Lawrence's home," he informed us. He left specific instructions about how it should be conducted. That night, back at my parents' house, Heather cornered me in the hallway outside my room. Her perfect features were arranged in an expression of fake sympathy that did not reach her eyes. "Just so you know," she said, her voice honey sweet, but with an edge I would not get your hopes up about tomorrow. Grandfather was very clear about wanting the company legacy preserved. He and I had many discussions about the future of Wilson Enterprises. I was too emotionally drained to rise to her bait. "I do not care about the money, Heather. I just miss him." She patted my arm condescendingly. "Of course you do. Just remember that some of us have been working for years to deserve our inheritance, not just showing up when it is convenient." Her words stung, especially because they were so unfair. I had visited Grandpa far more often than she had in his final years, but I was too tired to argue. I simply went into my room and closed the door, spending another restless night thinking about Grandpa and wondering what the next day would bring. The next morning, we all gathered in Grandpa Lawrence's study for the will reading. It was a beautiful room that perfectly reflected his personality. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls filled with first editions and well-loved paperbacks alike. His massive mahogany desk dominated one end of the room, while comfortable leather armchairs were arranged in a semicircle facing it. The wall behind the desk displayed his most treasured possessions, family photos, his college diploma awards from business associations, and the mixed media piece I had created that he had purchased from my first real exhibition. Franklin Pierce sat at the desk arranging papers with methodical precision. My parents took the 2 center chairs with Heather and Bradley to their right. I sat on my mother's left, feeling somewhat out of place in my simple black dress among their designer mourning clothes. The only other person present was Gerald Simmons, Grandpa's best friend of over 60 years, who sat beside me. "Thank you all for coming," Pierce began formally. Lawrence was very specific about how he wanted this proceeding to be conducted. "I will read the will exactly as he prepared it with no deviations." He put on his reading glasses and began with the standard legal preamble. Then came the smaller bequests, donations to various charities, gifts to longtime staff members, and a substantial sum to Gerald for 60 years of true friendship. Then came the bombshell. To my granddaughter, Heather Wilson Thompson, I leave the sum of $10 million Pierce read to be used as she sees fit to continue the Wilson business legacy that she has already proven herself capable of extending into the future. Heather's face lit up with triumph while my parents nodded in satisfaction. My father reached over to squeeze Heather's hand, pride evident in his expression. My mother actually clapped her hands together once in delight. "Well deserved, darling," she said to Heather. To my granddaughter, Kathleen Wilson Pierce continued, and I felt my heart rate increase. This was it. Maybe a small sum to help me get established as an artist, or perhaps some of his art collection that he knew I admired. I leave this letter to be managed by her father, Howard Wilson, as executor. Pierce finished. The room went completely silent. A letter. That was it. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. My father cleared his throat and stood up. As executor of this portion of the will, he said, his voice formal and cold, "I must inform Kathleen that the letter contains no financial bequest. My father and I discussed this at length before his passing. He agreed with our assessment that Kathleen needs to learn responsibility and self-sufficiency." I could not believe what I was hearing. Heather received $10 million and I got a letter with no money, and my father had convinced my dying grandfather that I deserved nothing. "This is what you need, Kathleen," my mother added, her voice sickly sweet. "You have been making poor choices for years. It is time you learned to earn your own way in the world just like your grandfather did. Heather has proven herself. You have not." I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but refused to let them fall. The humiliation of sitting there while my family essentially said I was unworthy of inheritance was almost unbearable. Heather was not even trying to hide her smug smile. "I just want to clarify," Bradley said, his corporate lawyer instincts kicking in, "that this means Kathleen receives no shares in Wilson Enterprises either, correct?" Before my father could answer, Franklin Pierce interrupted. "Actually, there is more to the will that pertains specifically to Kathleen," he said firmly. "Lawrence left explicit instructions that this portion was to be read privately to Kathleen alone." My father's face darkened. "That is highly irregular. As the executor." "With all due respect," Mr. Wilson Pierce cut in, "I am following your father's explicit legal instructions. He was very clear that this portion of the will was for Kathleen's ears only, at least initially." He turned to me. "Miss Wilson, if you would stay after the others leave, we can proceed with the private portion of the reading." My mother's perfectly manicured nails dug into the armrest of her chair. "This is a family matter. We should all hear whatever concerns Kathleen." Pierce remained unmoved. "These were Lawrence's instructions, and they are legally binding. I must ask everyone except Kathleen to leave the room at this time." After several minutes of protests and arguing, my family and Gerald finally filed out of the study, with my father threatening to call his own lawyers and my mother shooting venomous looks in my direction. When the door closed behind them, leaving me alone with Franklin Pierce, I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. "I apologize for the drama," Miss Wilson Pierce said, his formal demeanor softening slightly. "Your grandfather anticipated this reaction, which is why he structured his will this way." "I do not understand," I said, still reeling from what had happened. "Did my father really convince Grandpa to cut me out of the will?" Pierce removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Quite the opposite, actually. What I am about to share with you was arranged by your grandfather over the past 5 years. He was extremely careful to ensure that this information remained private until the right moment." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written on it in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. He handed it to me. "Perhaps you should read this first in your grandfather's own words." With trembling hands, I broke the seal and unfolded several pages of heavy stationery. "My dearest Katie," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then I have moved on to whatever adventure comes next. Do not grieve too much for me. I have had a full life, though. My greatest regret is not seeing the remarkable woman you will surely become. Over the years, I have watched how your parents and sister have treated you. I have seen them dismiss your passion and talent, measuring your worth only in dollars and social standing. I recognized early on that you are different from them, just as your grandmother Evelyn was different from me. She taught me that there is more to life than balance sheets and business acquisitions, though I fear your father never learned that lesson. I have also seen your determination to make your own way, despite their lack of support. Your resilience and authenticity have made me prouder than any business deal ever could. What your family does not know, what I have kept secret even from your father, is that over the past 20 years, I have been quietly building one of the finest private collections of contemporary art in New England. This collection, valued at approximately $25 million, I leave entirely to you. Franklin has the complete inventory and will help you decide what to do with it. Additionally, I have established a separate business entity called Evelyn's Legacy, named after your grandmother. This entity owns a beautiful 3-story building in downtown Boston that I purchased 5 years ago. The ground floor has been renovated as a gallery space, while the upper floors contain a luxury apartment and a studio space. All of this now belongs to you. A trust fund has been established that your parents cannot access or control. This will provide you with living expenses and startup costs for the gallery. Franklin has all the details and will help you access these funds. One last thing, Katie. For the past 3 years, I have been secretly purchasing your artwork through various intermediaries. These pieces form the heart of my collection because they speak to me in ways that even you do not realize. You have extraordinary talent, and now you will have the resources to share that talent with the world. Your family will likely be angry. They may try to contest the will or pressure you to share your inheritance. Stand firm. This is your legacy, not theirs. I have instructed Franklin to defend my wishes vigorously, should any challenges arise. Remember that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in passion, authenticity, and the courage to forge your own path. I love you, my dear granddaughter. Make your own kind of music. All my love, Grandpa Lawrence. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. I looked up at Franklin Pierce, who was waiting patiently. Is this real? I whispered. He nodded. Very real. Your grandfather was extremely strategic about all of this. The art collection was assembled under a separate LLC that your father knew nothing about. The downtown property was purchased through another business entity. Everything was arranged to be completely legal and virtually challenge-proof. But why not tell me while he was alive? He wanted to protect you from family pressure, Pierce explained. He knew that if your parents found out, they would either try to change his mind or put tremendous pressure on you to decline the inheritance. This way he could ensure you received what he wanted you to have. Pierce opened a leather portfolio and began showing me photographs of the building in downtown Boston, along with floor plans of the gallery space and apartment. He explained the financial arrangements in detail. The trust would provide me with $10,000 per month for living expenses, plus an initial $200,000 to launch the gallery. The trust was structured to last for 10 years, by which time he expected the gallery to be self-sustaining. The building alone is worth $7 million, Pierce continued. The art collection is insured for $25 million. Combined with the trust fund, your inheritance actually exceeds your sister's by a considerable margin. I felt overwhelmed. Just an hour ago, I had been publicly humiliated by my family, made to feel worthless. Now I was learning that my grandfather had secretly arranged for me to have everything I needed to pursue my dreams. There is one more thing, Pierce said, reaching into his briefcase again. He pulled out a leather-bound journal. Your grandfather kept this during the last 3 years of his life. It documents his thoughts about the inheritance and why he made the decisions he did. He asked me to give it to you as well. As I took the journal, Pierce's expression grew more serious. You should prepare yourself, Miss Wilson. When your family learns about this, they will not be happy. Your grandfather anticipated that they might contest the will. I am prepared to defend his wishes, but it could get unpleasant. I thought about my parents' faces when they learned the truth about Heather's smug smile being wiped away. Part of me wanted to run out of the study immediately and throw it in their faces. But another part, the part that had absorbed my grandfather's wisdom over the years, knew that this moment called for dignity, not petty revenge. How should we proceed? I asked, straightening my shoulders. Your grandfather left that decision to you, Pierce said. We can inform your family now, or you can take some time to process everything first. I took a deep breath. They are waiting right outside, probably getting angrier by the minute. Let us get this over with. Pierce nodded, respecting my decision. Very well. Would you like me to explain, or would you prefer to tell them yourself? I think it would be better coming from you, I said. Officially, I mean. He nodded and moved toward the door. Before opening it, he turned back to me. Your grandfather had tremendous faith in you, Miss Wilson. He often told me that you were the true heir to his creative spirit, if not his business acumen. With those words, he opened the door to face my family. My family burst into the study the moment Pierce opened the door. My father led the charge, his face flushed with anger. This has gone on long enough, he snapped. Whatever private arrangements my father made, I have a right to know as executor of his estate. My mother was right behind him, with Heather and Bradley following closely. Even Gerald had returned, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. Pierce resumed his position behind my grandfather's desk, once again the picture of professional detachment. I remained seated, clutching Grandpa's letter and journal, trying to project a calm I did not entirely feel. Now that everyone has returned, Pierce began formally. I can complete the reading of Lawrence Wilson's last will and testament as it pertains to Miss Kathleen Wilson. It is just a letter, my mother interrupted dismissively. Howard already explained the situation. Lawrence agreed that Kathleen needs to learn responsibility rather than receive a handout. Pierce cleared his throat. Actually, Mrs. Wilson, there is significantly more to the bequest than was initially disclosed. He proceeded to outline the entirety of my inheritance. The art collection, the downtown building, with the gallery and apartment, and the trust fund. As he spoke, I watched my family's expressions change from dismissive to shocked to outraged. This is preposterous, my father exploded when Pierce finished. My father would never have arranged this without consulting me. This must be a recent addition to the will made when he was not of sound mind. On the contrary, Pierce replied calmly. These arrangements began approximately 5 years ago and were updated regularly, with the most recent changes made 6 months ago. I have extensive documentation of your father's instructions, including video recordings of our meetings where he expressed his wishes clearly and coherently. My mother had gone completely pale, her perfectly made-up face frozen in disbelief. Then, as the reality sank in, she began to scream. This is completely unfair. How dare you, Kathleen? How dare you manipulate a sick old man to steal what rightfully belongs to this family, to the people who have actually worked for it? I did not know anything about this until just now, I said, finding my voice at last. Grandpa never told me. Liar, Heather spat. You always played the victim, always acted like you were so different and special. You have been manipulating Grandfather for years with your sob stories about struggling as an artist. That is not true. Gerald spoke up unexpectedly from the doorway. Lawrence and I discussed his plans for Katie's inheritance many times over the years. He was of completely sound mind, and he made these decisions because he genuinely believed in Katie's talent and character. My father whirled on Gerald. You knew about this and said nothing. What kind of friend are you? A loyal one, Gerald replied steadily. Lawrence asked for my discretion, and I respected his wishes, just as you should respect them now, Howard. This will not stand, my father declared. I will contest the will. There is no way my father intended for the bulk of his fortune to go to a struggling artist with no business sense whatsoever. Actually, Bradley interjected, his lawyer's mind, clearly assessing the situation. If Mr. Pierce has video documentation, and the arrangements were made over several years, contesting could be difficult and expensive. My mother shot him a venomous look. Whose side are you on, Bradley? The argument escalated with accusations flying. My mother called me selfish and underhanded. My father threatened lawsuits against both me and Pierce. Heather vacillated between crying about the unfairness and hurling insults at me. Through it all, I sat quietly thinking about my grandfather's words. Stand firm. This is your legacy, not theirs. For perhaps the first time in my life, I felt a strength within me that could not be diminished by their disapproval or anger. Finally, when there was a brief lull in the shouting, I stood up. I did not ask for this inheritance, I said clearly. But Grandpa Lawrence believed in me and my dreams when none of you did. He saw value in me that went beyond balance sheets and business achievements. He was clearly not thinking straight, my father retorted. No, Dad. He was thinking more clearly than any of you. You all measure success in dollars and status. Grandpa understood that there are other forms of wealth, other types of success. Easy to say when you have just been handed millions, Heather snapped. I would have continued pursuing my art even without this inheritance, I replied calmly. The difference is that now I can do it without struggling quite so much. Grandpa did not give me this money because I needed it to be successful. He gave it to me because he believed I already was successful in ways that matter to me. My mother stood up, her face contorted with rage. You have a choice to make right now, Kathleen. If you accept this ridiculous inheritance, you are no longer part of this family. No daughter of mine would steal from her own sister and parents like this. I looked at her, really. Looked at the woman who had given birth to me, but had never truly seen me. I am not stealing anything. I am honoring Grandpa's wishes. And if you cannot accept that, then maybe I am better off without this family. You ungrateful little. My mother began, but my father put a restraining hand on her arm. This is not over, he said coldly. We will be contacting our attorneys immediately. Do not think for one moment that you will get away with this. With that, he steered my mother toward the door. Heather gave me one last contemptuous look before following them. Bradley hesitated, then nodded slightly to me before joining his wife. Only Gerald remained looking at me with a mixture of sadness and pride. Your grandfather would be proud of you, Katie, he said softly. He knew this would happen, and he knew you would have the strength to handle it. As the sound of my family's angry voices faded down the hallway, I sat back down, suddenly exhausted, but also feeling strangely liberated. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to my family without backing down, without apologizing for who I was. Pierce gathered his papers, looking slightly ruffled but professional as ever. That went about as well as your grandfather predicted, he said. Would you like me to arrange for you to see the gallery building tomorrow? I nodded, still processing everything that had happened. Yes, I would like that. And Mr. Pierce, thank you for handling all of this. I know it cannot have been easy. He allowed himself a small smile. Your grandfather was a remarkable man, Miss Wilson. It is an honor to carry out his final wishes. He handed me his business card. Call me any time. We have a lot to discuss in the coming days. As I left my grandfather's study that day, I knew that my life had irrevocably changed, not just because of the inheritance, but because I had finally found my voice and my strength. 3 months after the will reading, I stood in the middle of the gallery space that now belonged to me, hardly able to believe the transformation. The 3-story brownstone in Boston's South End was even more beautiful than the photographs had shown. The ground floor had high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and gleaming hardwood floors with large windows that let in abundant natural light. The perfect space to showcase art. Franklin Pierce had been invaluable during the transition period. He connected me with contractors to make minor renovations to the gallery space, helped me navigate the legalities of business ownership, and most importantly defended my inheritance against my family's legal challenges. As Pierce had predicted, my father filed to contest the will almost immediately. However, the extensive documentation my grandfather had prepared, including the video recordings of him clearly stating his wishes, made their case extremely weak. After 6 weeks of legal maneuvering, their attorney advised them to drop the challenge, which they reluctantly did. I had not spoken to my parents or Heather since the day of the will reading. They had made their position clear, and I had made my choice. It hurt, of course, but the pain was overshadowed by the excitement of building something new. One of the first people Pierce introduced me to was Julia Thompson, a respected gallery owner who had been a friend of my grandfather's. A stylish woman in her 60s with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, Julia became both mentor and friend as I navigated the complexities of the art world from the owner's perspective. Your grandfather approached me about 2 years ago, she explained during our first meeting over coffee in my new apartment above the gallery. He asked me to be available to guide you when the time came. He was very confident in your eye for art, but he knew the business side would be challenging at first. Julia helped me understand the gallery business from top to bottom, how to approach artists, how to price artwork, how to organize exhibitions, and how to build relationships with collectors. Under her guidance, I began to develop a vision for what would become Evelyn's Gallery, named in honor of my grandmother. You need to find your niche, Julia advised. What makes your gallery different from the dozens of others in Boston? What artists will you champion? What statement do you want to make with your space? These questions led me to many late nights poring over art magazines, visiting other galleries, and reflecting on my own artistic sensibilities. I decided that Evelyn's would focus on emerging artists working in mixed media and experimental techniques, particularly those whose work explored themes of identity and transformation. It felt fitting, given my own ongoing transformation. During this period, I also spent time with the art collection my grandfather had left me. It was housed in a climate-controlled storage facility, and walking through it for the first time with the curator he had hired was an overwhelming experience. The collection included works by established contemporary artists like Gerhard Richter and Kara Walker, alongside pieces by promising newcomers. And there in a special section were 12 of my own pieces purchased through intermediaries over the past 3 years. He was particularly proud of this section, the curator told me, indicating my work. He called it the heart of the collection. Reading my grandfather's journal became a nightly ritual. His entries chronicled not just his thoughts about the inheritance he was planning for me, but also memories of my childhood observations about my growth as an artist, and his own reflections on life and legacy. Through his words, I felt his presence guiding me. One entry in particular stood out. Watched Katie's exhibition opening from across the street today. Could not go in without revealing my interest, but saw her through the window explaining her work to visitors. The passion in her gestures, the light in her eyes when someone connected with a piece. That is success. Howard would call it sentimental nonsense, but I have made more money than any man needs in 3 lifetimes. What matters now is ensuring that Katie has the chance to light up rooms with that passion for decades to come. The journal helped me understand conversations and moments with my grandfather that had seemed ordinary at the time, but were actually part of his larger plan. Questions about my dreams for the future, discussions about artists I admired, even casual comments about neighborhoods in Boston, all had been gathering information for the legacy he was creating. Despite the financial cushion provided by the trust launching the gallery, was not without challenges. There were permits to obtain insurance policies, to navigate employees to hire, and 1,000 other details that sometimes left me overwhelmed. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I was in over my head, if my family had been right about my lack of business acumen. During one particularly stressful week when a plumbing issue threatened to delay our opening, I received an unexpected visit. I was in the gallery supervising emergency repairs when the bell over the door rang, and I turned to see Heather standing there looking uncomfortable and out of place. "Heather," I said, surprised, "what are you doing here?" She glanced around at the chaos of the repairs, then back at me. "I was in the neighborhood for a meeting. Thought I would see what you were doing with grandfather's money." There was an edge to her voice, but not the open hostility I had expected. I gestured to the space around us. "Well, this is it. Or what it will be once the pipes stop leaking." An awkward silence fell between us. Finally, Heather spoke again. "Mother and father do not know I am here. They would be furious." "Are they still angry?" I asked, though I knew the answer. She nodded. "Father especially. The legal defeat was hard for him to accept." She paused, then added more quietly, "The company is struggling a bit without grandfather's connections. Father will not admit it, but we have lost some key investors." I was not sure how to respond to that. Part of me felt a petty satisfaction, but mostly I just felt sad for the broken state of our family. "I am sorry to hear that." Heather looked at me directly for the first time. "Did you really not know about the inheritance?" "No," I said firmly. "I had no idea until Pierce read the will. Grandpa never told me." She studied my face, then nodded slightly, seeming to accept my answer. "It is an impressive space," she admitted, looking around. "What kind of art will you show?" I explained my vision for the gallery, warming to the topic despite myself. To my surprise, Heather listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about my plans. "You seem to have really thought this through," she said, when I finished, a note of surprise in her voice. "I may not have gone to business school, but I am not completely clueless," I replied, unable to keep a slight defensive tone from my voice. Heather had the grace to look embarrassed. "I know. I just." She trailed off, then took a different approach. "Your apartment upstairs, is it nice?" "Would you like to see it?" I offered impulsively. She hesitated, then nodded. I led her up the private staircase to the second-floor apartment, which I had spent the past month making into a home. Unlike our parents' sterile showroom-perfect house, I had created a space that was comfortable and personal, with colorful textiles, artwork on every wall, and plants in the windows. "It is very you," Heather commented, running her hand along a bookshelf filled with art books and novels. "Is that a compliment or a criticism?" I asked. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. A bit of both, maybe. She turned to face me. Look, Katie, I'm not going to pretend that I am happy about how things turned out. But after the initial shock, I have been thinking about what grandfather did. And while I still think it was unfair to give you so much more, I interrupted. You got $10 million. And you got over 30 million in assets, she countered. But that is not my point. My point is that I have been thinking about why grandfather made that choice. And I realized that maybe he saw something in you that the rest of us missed. It was as close to an apology or reconciliation as I was likely to get from Heather. I decided to accept it for what it was. Thank you for saying that, I said. And for what it is worth, I think you deserve every penny of your inheritance. You have worked incredibly hard for the company. She nodded, accepting the olive branch. I should go. Bradley is waiting. At the door, she paused. Good luck with the gallery, Katie. I mean that. After she left, I sat on my couch processing the unexpected encounter. It was not a full reconciliation, not by a long shot, but it was something. A crack in the wall of family estrangement. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity, as the gallery's opening approached. I selected 8 emerging artists for our inaugural exhibition titled Metamorphosis. Each artist's work explored themes of transformation and rebirth, reflecting my own journey. Despite my initial reluctance, Julia convinced me to include 3 of my own pieces in a small side exhibition. Your grandfather believed in your talent, she argued. Honor that belief by showing your work alongside the artists you are championing. The night before the opening, I stood alone in the completed gallery, looking at the artwork installed on the walls, the lighting perfect, the space transformed from a construction zone to a temple of creativity. For the first time since my grandfather's death, I felt a sense of peace and purpose that transcended the pain of family rejection. We did it, Grandpa, I whispered to the empty room. Thank you for believing in me. 1 year, after the grand opening of Evelyn's gallery, I stood in the center of the main exhibition space, watching as guests mingled at our anniversary celebration. The gallery had exceeded all expectations, quickly establishing itself as one of Boston's most innovative art spaces. We had mounted 6 successful exhibitions, launched the careers of 3 promising artists, and even received a write-up in a national art magazine that called Evelyn's a breath of fresh air in Boston's sometimes staid art scene. My own artistic career had flourished alongside the gallery's success. With the financial security provided by my inheritance, I had been able to devote more time to creating my own work. A small exhibition of my mixed media pieces had sold out, and I had been invited to participate in a group show at the Museum of Contemporary Art. The journey had not been without challenges. Running a business required skills I had never developed, and there had been plenty of mistakes along the way. But with Julia's mentorship and my own determination, I had learned quickly. More importantly, I had discovered strengths within myself that I never knew existed: leadership, decision-making, and yes, even a head for business that would have shocked my father. Speaking of my father, 3 months earlier, I had received a letter from him. Written on his law firm's stationery and formal in tone, it nevertheless represented the first outreach from my family since Heather's visit to the gallery before its opening. Dear Kathleen, it began. Recent events have prompted me to reflect on our family situation. While I continue to have reservations about the manner in which my father chose to distribute his estate, I cannot deny that you have managed your inheritance with more acumen than I anticipated. The success of your gallery has been noted in circles that matter, and several business associates have spoken highly of your professionalism and vision. Your mother and I would be amenable to discussing a reconciliation, should you be interested in such a conversation. Regardless of past disagreements, you remain our daughter. Sincerely, Howard Wilson. It was hardly a warm invitation, but it was something. After much soul-searching and several sessions with a therapist, I had started seeing to process my family dynamics. I had responded with a brief note agreeing to meet for lunch at a neutral location. That lunch had been tense and awkward, with my mother saying little and my father controlling the conversation as usual, but it was a start. We had agreed to move forward slowly with boundaries firmly in place. I made it clear that I would not tolerate any further attempts to control my life or disparage my choices. I am proud of what I have built, I told them. I hope someday you can be proud of me too, not despite who I am, but because of who I am. My relationship with Heather had improved more significantly. After her initial visit to the gallery, she had returned for the opening night and had been genuinely impressed by what I had accomplished. Over the past year, we had begun to rebuild our relationship, meeting occasionally for coffee or dinner. She had even purchased a piece from one of my artists for her office, a small gesture that meant more to me than she probably realized. The healing process with my family was ongoing and imperfect, but it was progress. Through therapy, I had come to understand that while I could not change my parents or make them fully accept my choices, I could change how I responded to their criticism and conditional love. As I circulated through the anniversary party, greeting artists, collectors, and friends, I caught sight of a new addition to the gallery, a bronze plaque near the entrance that read Evelyn's Gallery, established 2024, founded in memory of Evelyn Wilson and Lawrence Wilson. It had been installed that morning, a surprise gift from Julia and the gallery staff. One of my proudest accomplishments of the past year had been the establishment of the Wilson Arts Foundation, a nonprofit organization funded by a portion of my inheritance. The foundation provided scholarships and grants to young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds, giving them opportunities that might otherwise have been out of reach. It was my way of extending my grandfather's legacy of generosity and belief in untapped potential. Gerald, my grandfather's friend, who had stood by me during the will reading confrontation, had become a regular visitor to the gallery and a trusted advisor for the foundation. His stories about my grandfather and grandmother helped me feel connected to my family history in a way that transcended the difficulties with my parents. Your grandmother would have loved this place, he told me at the anniversary party, looking around at the vibrant artwork and diverse crowd. She always believed that art was how we make sense of the world. Lawrence understood that about her, even though it was not his natural inclination. That is why he made sure you would have this opportunity. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, I found myself alone in the gallery once more. I walked slowly through the space, looking at each piece of art on display, thinking about the journey of the past year. My grandfather's inheritance had changed my life in ways that went far beyond the financial security it provided. The money had given me opportunities, yes, but the true gift had been the confidence to forge my own path, to trust my instincts, and to value my own definition of success. I had learned that wealth could be measured in many ways: in creative fulfillment, in meaningful relationships, in the ability to help others pursue their dreams. I had learned that standing up for yourself does not mean cutting others out of your life, but rather establishing healthy boundaries that allow for authentic connection. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth was not defined by my family's approval or by conventional metrics of success. It came from within, from being true to myself and my values. I stopped in front of a photograph on my office wall, my grandfather Lawrence, in his later years standing in front of his first hardware store, the humble beginning of what would become Wilson Enterprises. His expression was one of quiet pride and determination, the same qualities he had recognized and nurtured in me. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered to the photograph, not just for the money, but for seeing me when no one else did. The journey was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more growth, more lessons to learn. But for the first time in my life, I was facing the future with confidence, rather than anxiety, with excitement, rather than dread. I had found my own path, and it was beautiful. So, what about you? Has anyone in your life ever truly seen and supported your dreams when others did not? Or have you had to find your own way despite family expectations? Let me know in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories like this, and share with someone who might need to be reminded of their own worth beyond other people's expectations. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that true wealth comes from being authentically yourself. No inheritance can give you that. It has to come from within.